Today's conversation is one that stayed with me a long time after we stopped recording. My guest is Lexi Benitez. And while she's only 23 years old, she has lived a life that has required a level of resilience, self-awareness, and emotional maturity that many of us do not reach until much, much later in life, if at all. Lexi was raised by her great-grandparents because her teen parents were in and out of jail and were having a hard time with their own lives. And then she lost the woman who raised her just before graduating high school and spent years carrying responsibility that was never meant to be hers in the first place. She talks openly about depression, suicidal ideation, leaving the Mormon church, and the moment she realized that her parents' pain was not her burden to carry. What struck me most about my conversation with Lexi is how honest she is about what it took to step out of survival mode. From working on an oil rig in North Dakota to starting her podcast, Sincerely Self, she shares how self-reflection, forgiveness, and choosing herself became the turning point. This conversation about healing without a timeline, forgiveness without obligation, and why your trauma does not get to decide who you become is one for the records. So let's get into it with Lexi. Hey everybody, welcome back to another fascinating episode of Midlife Strategies for Badass Women. Now, my guest today, I will be honest, is not in her midlife. However, she has lived a very full life in her short chronological lifespan. And I'm really excited to talk to her today because when I was reading her bio, and also this is a pod swap. So I have been on Lexi's show. She's a podcast host, and I was on her show. As a matter of fact, our episode together dropped on her podcast January 3rd. So I will put a link for that in the show notes. And so we're doing a little pod swap, and I'm very excited to talk to her today. My guest today is Lexi Benitez, right? Benitez.
Yeah, Benitez.
My guest today is Lexi Benitez, and I am so excited to have her on the show. She is also a podcaster, as I mentioned, and the name of her podcast is Sincerely Self. And we're going to get to where the podcast title originated from and, and get to know Lexi a little bit more because she has a fascinating story. Lexi, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Sue. I'm so excited to be on your podcast. I've actually never been on someone else's podcast before.
Really?
So
No
yeah,
way.
you would think where I do have a podcast that I would have tried it out on someone else's before, but I actually never have. So I'm so excited to be joining you today and to be joining your audience.
Awesome. Well, let's just kick it off because we have a lot of things to unpack here today.
Oh, yes.
Now, I did mention that you are not in midlife. You are just like well, compared to me, right? So, as we were saying before we got on, I wish that I had gotten as much insight and emotional intelligence at the ripe age of 23 that you have. And I know that you did not come by this easily. So if you could just kind of tell us how you got to this point, because you've had to put up with a lot of things. So let's just kind of dig in and let me know where you're coming from. Let our
Yeah, dive
listeners
right
know
into
where you're
it.
coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, like you were saying, I am only 23. And so technically, I guess I'm like in the infancy of adulthood, like barely starting out. But mentally, I do feel like I am so much farther than that. And it does come with a lot of things that I had to experience young. I was raised by my great grandparents. My parents had me as teenagers, and they both were in and out of jail my entire childhood, pretty much up until I was about 9. And then when I was 9, my dad did get deported, and I didn't see him for 11 years, didn't reunite with him till I was 20, so actually pretty recent.
Wow.
And I started forming a relationship with my mom around the time I was 18. And so being raised by my grandparents who are much older than me, I feel like I kind of took on, they just taught me so much wisdom. And so I think I kind of gained an older perspective on life just from being surrounded by them and being raised by them. And I'm so grateful for them. My grandma passed away when it was mid-COVID,
Mm.
2020, a week before I graduated high school. I lived with my grandma, left for work, came back, ambulances everywhere. It was crazy, very unexpected. And I feel like that, being 18, experiencing the loss of pretty much my mom, who I viewed as my mom at the time, losing my maternal figure so young kind of forced me to realize like what am I going to do in my life? Like I don't have my comfort person, I don't have my rock necessarily anymore. And so I felt like at that point I kind of had to grow up. I had to be there for my younger siblings. I have 10 younger siblings between both of my parents.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. So that's something on its own.
Yeah, I would say so. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, that's like always everyone's like, "What?" Because yeah. But I have 10 younger siblings through my parents and 6 or 5 through my mom. And so I feel like I really had to step up for them as well. And once I was 21, I kind of fell into a pit. I'd moved out when I was 18 and was working multiple jobs all the time, trying to go to college, trying to become a teacher. And then when I was 21, I just fell into a super deep depression. And I was like, I don't want to be a teacher anymore, but I've invested so much money and time into this degree. What do I do? I lost my job that I had at the time as a paraeducator in the school, so couldn't pay my rent. And I quit school and I got an invitation by one of my friends to go to the oil rig. And so I went. I went with her and I worked in the oil rig this summer of being 21. And that really forced me to self evaluate. I feel like that really is the moment where I'm like, it's just me and my thoughts most of the day, really. And that's where the concept of my podcast came to be. Sincerely Self is like a love letter to yourself. And I realized that I had been neglecting my self esteem, my self image, my self love, my whole life up until that point. And I could see that it was playing a hand in how I viewed the world and in the experiences that I was having. And so while I'm in the oil rig, I start coming up with this idea of, okay, when I get home, I'm going to start this podcast. And so I want to say 2 weeks after I got home, I recorded the first episode and I haven't looked back. It's been such a good catalyst for me and it's forced me to turn inwards and completely changed me as a person. So that's like a quick summarized version, I guess, of what led me
Okay.
to where I am now.
Okay. All right. Wow.
Yeah.
Let's see. Where do we start? When do we
No,
talk about the
seriously.
10 siblings? Do we talk about the so I love the fact that you I don't love the fact that you had to be raised by your grandparents, but I love the fact that they were there for you. And
Yeah.
I think, similarly, um I didn't have that exact same experience, but growing up with a single alcoholic parent was sort of like,
Mhm.
okay, I had to figure a lot of shit out myself. And it's,
Yeah.
and I, when I was younger, I had a grandmother figure that raised me and was also kind of very strict and stuff. And that was that was okay. But that was when I was younger. But then as I got older,
Mhm.
more teenage years and stuff like that, it was a little wild and like, just trying to figure stuff out myself. And it sounds like, when your grandma passed, that kind of threw you into that kind of space where you're like, okay, now what, right? I've lost this anchor. I've
Yeah.
lost this person that has been my rock for a really long time. And um I want to know a little bit more about the oil rig too, because that sounds like quite an experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you went to live with, so you were the oldest or you were the first, right? With your parents, you said
Yeah.
they were teenagers,
Mhm.
and then they were dealing with their own shit, as our parents do, right? Our parents have
Oh,
their
yeah.
own shit, which is not ours.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of times it's hard to figure that out. It sounds like Tell me a little bit more about how you kind of came to terms with that because you were in this tumultuous situation. You didn't really get
Mhm.
to know your parents. How did you feel about, your stuff and versus their stuff?
Yeah, when you were saying your parents' shit isn't yours, it took me so long to realize that. I would say I didn't realize that till I left for the oil rig, and I was separated from my family for so long. That was the first time. I mean, it was 3 months, but that was the first time I'd gone without being in contact with my family. And I really didn't talk to them much while I was there. And that made me see it from an outside point of view. And I'm like, this isn't my burden. This isn't mine to carry. This isn't mine to figure out. And so I feel like I held so much resentment towards my parents the first, probably up until I was like 18, and I was forced to kind of face it a little bit more and try and form a little bit of relationships with them when my grandma passed away. But eventually I got to the point where I realized the resentment that I was holding for them and trying to almost shield my siblings, I guess, from what I had. And though my parents both have stepped up and, became sober and are great parents now, I, I had one version. And so I viewed them as that version. And so I would try and step up for my siblings and do all these things to try and shield them from it. And when I left for the oil rig, I realized that's not my job. And they need to step up and take the parental role. And I can't teach them into that, especially because I'm not a parent. It's not my role. And so I kind of realized, I can forgive them because the resentment was eating me alive, but I don't have to forgive them for them to feel better. I can forgive them for me to feel better. And so that was like the biggest thing for me was being able to forgive them and start forming a relationship because it helped me to feel better. And I know it did help them as like a positive outcome from the situation, but I realized I can put myself first in forgiveness when I'm forgiving somebody else.
Those are very wise words coming from someone your age, and that's not a slam at all. That's just
Yeah.
like I'm kind of stunned and amazed that you came to that realization. Did you come to that realization on your own, or did you have help? How did you get that wisdom?
So I had a girlfriend that I went to the oil rig with, and we were with her family. Her family owned a company in the oil rig, and I lived with her. We worked together every day. And so she was somebody that I could really open up to. And I opened up to her mom a lot, who was a life coach. And so being able to open up to her and her mom about all these things that I had really kept to myself. I never did therapy or anything like that up to that point. And so I had never ever unpacked any of this or realized that it wasn't normal until I talked with them. And so I think for me the biggest thing really was kind of getting it out into the open so that I could see it clearer and so that I could also get feedback from somebody else. Because sometimes it's hard to see the severity of a situation on how it's affecting you when it's only you who's viewing it. So I love that you brought up, did I talk with anybody else? Because that really was such a big part for me, being able to be like, okay, it's not normal for me to feel this way. I don't have to carry all this. Now what do I do?
Yeah, that's brilliant because you're right. It's like, okay, once you take the blinders off, because we all have blind spots, right? We all have
Oh
things
yeah.
that we don't want to see, and it's much easier to point the finger at your parents. Well, you did this to me and whatever. And I had to come to that realization as well. It's like, your shit's not mine. And I did not come to that realization at 23. I wish that I had, but it took me a lot longer. So I love that you were able to find someone who could help you, sort through those things and regulate and it's a big deal to have the understanding of, oh, okay, I'm responsible for myself. I don't have to have everybody's steamer trunk in the overhead bin on the airplane, right? I can just condense
Mhm.
my stuff down to a carry-on and let them deal with their own luggage, right?
Absolutely. I feel like there's something they say about oldest daughters, about how they are the peacemakers, they are the trauma holders, they are the ones who control have to control everything. And I feel like I embodied that my whole life up until that point. And that is when I realized, like you said, this is not my shit to carry. This is not my job. And in me stepping back and playing the daughter role, the 21-year-old daughter role, instead of trying to be a parent, my relationships with my siblings increased, really. They were able to have a big sister instead of another mom. And it pushed my parents to step up because I wasn't there to do the things that they were missing, the things that were slipping in between the cracks. And so my biggest fear was me, stepping down and not doing those things and then not getting done. And then I realized they did it. They did it as soon as I stopped doing it. And so I think for all oldest daughters out there, no matter how old you are, like, stop doing everyone else's shit and they will figure it out. They will step up and they'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. So I got to tell you, when you told me about the 10 siblings and that, and you being at the top of the hierarchy, being and being all the care. Have you ever seen the show Shameless?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
That, the oldest daughter is trying to keep all of the kids together and they are down to like an infant from and
Yeah.
and it's just like herding cats first of all, and you're all kind of in this together with you at the helm, it sounds like. So that's what came to mind when you started talking about it. I'm like, oh my god, that sounds like Shameless.
No, literally, when I watched that show, I was like, why does this feel familiar? Like, why am I
Yeah, I
resonating
wonder.
with her? Yeah,
did it
100%.
did it give you any trauma response?
Honestly, a little. I was like, why am I feeling so nervous watching this? And then I realized, oh, it feels familiar.
Oh,
So,
that's my life. Shit, what the
yeah,
heck. So
no, seriously.
So I want to dig in a little bit. So you were living with your grandparents. Where were the other kids living? Where were the other siblings living over the years?
Yeah, so the five siblings that are through my mom, they were in and out of apartments most of my childhood. They moved in, I want to say a year and a half with my grandma that I had lived with the whole time before she passed away. So about
Mhm.
when I was 16-ish, my mom had another baby, my youngest brother, and she moved back in with my grandma because she was a single mom at that time, at that point.
Okay.
And so then all of us were in that house. And so it ended up working out because then we were all forced to kind of be a family in the same space, but it
Yeah.
just was under not ideal circumstances. My other siblings have two other moms and we share a dad. And so they're kind of spread out and my relationship with them hasn't, unfortunately, up until I became an adult, wasn't nearly as close just
Mhm.
because I wasn't with them. My dad was in a different country and they were in the US, but we didn't have the same mom and I couldn't drive or anything like that.
Wow.
Now I have a really good relationship with them, but we grew up in very different circumstances. And so it's kind of interesting to see the relationships that I do have with my siblings
Hmm.
are kind of different, kind of varying from which parent they came from. But I think if anyone has half siblings, they kind of feel that, whichever parent you're with the most, those other siblings, you didn't grow up with them. So the bond is different, but it's still there.
Yeah. Whew, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm an only child. I am an only child, so I can absolutely not relate to having that many siblings. And it's funny because I think, well, it would have been nice if I had a couple of siblings, like when my mom was, declining and all of that. And then I'm like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah, you're like, that's
I
totally
get,
fine.
I get to be like, okay, I'll just hang with this.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
really
just like
good at
this.
amusing myself, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you feel like talking about this or not, but and it doesn't come as a surprise to me that you did have a suicide attempt, as did
Mhm.
I when I was a teenager. I just felt like, we talked about it a little bit on your show.
Yeah.
So tell me about that dark moment, if you don't mind talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually had two. The
Mm,
first one happened right after my grandma passed away. We're in COVID, we're locked in. I just graduated high school. I'm now living solely with my mom, who I did not have a good relationship with at that point, and all my younger siblings, and I'm trying to work and things, and I mentally was struggling so hard. I also was raised in the Mormon church, and I grew up Mormon my whole life. And
Okay, I
so,
don't mean to laugh, but I'm just like, okay, well, there's another box we just
yeah,
checked. Okay, we'll talk about
there's
that
a
later.
whole other thing. Yeah, now there's religious trauma in the mix, but
Oh my God.
I couldn't wrap my head around what had happened with my family and why I'd grown up the way I did. And so now I'm like questioning the church that I was in because I'm like, none of this makes sense with the ideology that they have, the broken families, my grandma passing away so unexpectedly, all these things that happened to me. I'm like, why are these things happening? They don't make sense. And so I left the church that I was in, and I had never drinking alcohol, anything like that up until that point. And I started drinking a little bit, and I wasn't addicted or anything like that at that point, but I feel like it kind of fed into how I was feeling mentally. I got diagnosed with depression when I was 18, and I stopped taking any medication I was on, and I had written letters, I had a day, I had a plan, and then I thought of the people that I love, and really what took me out of it was how I felt other people would feel. It wasn't me. And so I think it obviously was amazing that I didn't make the decision to do it,
Hmm.
but my reasoning for not doing it wasn't because I felt like I deserved to live. It was because I didn't want to hurt the people that loved me and leave them in a worse situation. And so when it happened again when I was 21, I had just came out of my first relationship, or actually was when I was 20, so a year before the oil rig and all that stuff. I just came out of my first relationship. It was a super, super toxic one, really bad. And we were very trauma bonded. And so when that relationship ended, I was like, okay, here's another anchor, another rock that I had that's gone. And so once again, I had a plan. And that time, I actually had prayed, which was the first time that I had prayed in a long time. And I actually felt like I needed to stay for me and for my life. I felt like I still had things that I needed to experience for me. And so having those two suicide attempts or suicide plans, I guess,
Hmm.
the outcomes of both are obviously really good ways that it got me to not, but the time that I chose life for me really, I think, was the catalyst that pushed me so much into self-development and self-growth because I chose life for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you weren't living for someone else. You were living for
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I believe that. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Wow. Okay. And then you went on the oil rig and
Yeah.
what was that experience like? Because I can't imagine that was easy work. How long were you
Oh,
out for? And you're,
yeah.
a 21-year-old young woman
Yeah.
on an oil rig. I mean, that doesn't sound like a fun place to be honest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was not fun. It was the hardest work I had ever done up to that point. Constantly covered in dirt, constantly covered in oil, in like with headgear and helmets and gloves and all these things for from like 4 a.m. to like 5 p.m. every day because I was working as much as I possibly could because I went there to get money. So I was
Yeah.
working 6 to 7 days a week if
Right.
possible. And
Well,
that's
what else are you going to do? You're stuck on an oil rig. It's not like you're going to
exactly.
like go out and have fun.
No, seriously, in North Dakota, I'm like, there's
Oh my
nothing going
God.
on. Yeah. It when like complete isolation, really. I think I do have fond memories from it because of
You
who I
do?
went there with. Surprisingly, yeah.
Okay.
Not necessarily the work, like the work, absolutely would never recommend or do it in my life ever, ever again. But going with one of my best friends and having the experiences I did with her family made the experience where I do have good memories. If I would have gone by myself, I don't think I would feel the same way. And I don't know if I would have left with the same mindset that I did. But I think the people that I was with made the experience more endurable. But the work itself, absolutely horrible, would never do again.
Well, sometimes I think that's pretty cool that you did that because I've done a lot of
Thank
crazy
you.
stuff in my life and I've had a lot of
Yeah.
weird jobs. I mean, I worked in a strip club and that was interesting. Not as a stripper, for those of you listening out there, nobody needs to see that. Anyway, uh, but, but I mean, we all do things at some point. Like during the
Yeah.
pandemic, I drove a delivery truck for Amazon because I was in real
Yeah.
estate and I'm like, well, there's nothing else going on. Might as well do that. And that was kind
Mhm.
of weird. Sometimes I like doing things for the experience. Oil rig has never been on my is not on my resume, though I will say that, and I think it probably never will be. But
Yeah, that makes sense. Now that I have done it, I do love that I can say that I did it,
yeah.
but I would never do it again. As long as I can help it, I would never do it again.
Okay, so you did bring up something earlier, and I want to go back to the Mormon Church.
Yes.
Let's talk
Yeah,
about the Mormon Church because so
for
were
sure.
your parents Mormons? Were your grandparents? Where did you?
My mom's family were all Mormon. My mom
Okay.
had left the church when she was a teenager, but my grandparents that raised me were very, very predominantly Mormon, and same with my mom's parents, very predominantly Mormon. And so that I started doing it from as long as I can remember. My whole life, even as an infant, I was going to the Mormon church. So it was all that I knew.
Yeah.
And I still have family in the church. I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing, but I do think that there are belief systems in it that coming from such a broken home really made me worry. Like as a little kid, I was worrying that like I was going to go to hell because my family wasn't a complete family and we weren't sealed in the temple and all these things. Like
Mm,
I had these worries because I didn't have the picture perfect family that they talk about in the church. And so I think it really affected the way that I viewed God. And I was so resentful towards God because of this religion that I was a part of. And so, yeah, the Mormon church I left when I was 18, still haven't looked back, still haven't gone back, don't want to ever, but I do think it kind of affected the relationship that I had with my family, with God. It affected the viewpoints that I had on what came after we passed away and all these things. So, yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. I am
Mhm.
definitely. I never. Well, I think we were Presbyterian. My parents were whatever that means. I
Yeah.
hardly ever went to church. It was not anything that I ever gravitated towards personally because I don't know. I had some friends that were Catholic, and we would like pretend like we were going to go to the evening service on Saturday so that she wouldn't have to go on. But we'd actually go play tennis like down in the basement
Yeah.
of the church and then grab a program on the way out. I mean, that's kind of my connection with organized religion. And I now am very spiritual, but not into organized religion in any way, shape, or form. But I do believe in a higher power and you know, energy and all of that stuff. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's what we believe in and everything. But yes, that's really interesting that you had done a lot of stuff and yeah, okay. Um,
Yeah.
so coming to this self-realization that you had, it sounds like it was partially because you were removed from everything. You were on the oil rig. You were now was your friend's parents on there as well, or were they just keeping in touch with you guys? Were they with you?
So, yeah, they had like a plot of land that they had bought and they had put, I want to say maybe six trailer homes on it.
Hmm,
And then they had built their house on the same land. So
okay.
they were within walking distance from us. They put me and my friend in the trailer home closest to their house. So that was really nice that they
Mhm.
were so close.
Yeah.
But we were all just kind of on this land away from everything. So we
Wow.
were isolated, but we were isolated together instead of just completely and by ourselves.
Right, right. And then having that connection with your friend's mom, who was a life coach, gave you the opportunity to come to some realizations with guidance.
Hmm.
Tell me a little bit
Yeah,
more about that.
absolutely. Yeah, talking with her kind of about the experiences that I had had in my life up to that point,
Mhm.
and honestly, the way that I viewed myself, I didn't think really anything of self-esteem. I had none. And I didn't realize it at the point. I realized once I had started kind of opening this conversation with her, that what I was experiencing was ego-based confidence. So I only felt pretty if I was getting enough likes on Instagram or if boys were telling me that I was pretty, but I didn't feel pretty. I only liked the traits about myself that other people had complimented me on, but I
Mm,
didn't have any that I liked really about myself. And so the more that I talked with her, she had like these retreats that she would do with midlife women
nice.
who would like kind of have their babysitters come, and they would all go on these retreats together and talk about sex, talk about womanhood, talk about really anything under the sun. And that was so like intriguing to me. I was like, I've literally never heard of anything like this before. And then she explained to me the benefits of it and like how some people might feel and why they want to do it. And I was like, I feel lost like that too. I feel like I don't know myself like that too. And so she really introduced me to the concept of, well, your self-esteem should not come from other people. That's the whole point itself, is because it needs to come from within. And so
Mm,
she had me start doing like affirmations and introduced me to like Abraham Hicks and Joe Dispenza
mhm.
and some of these amazing leaders that I still listen to so much to this day. And through starting to listen to them, it's like things were starting to click. And I'm like, wait, this makes sense. Wait, this makes sense why I would want to do this instead. And so I feel like she was kind of the point that pushed me into more spirituality and more mindset work and more self work.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm so happy that you had her, in your life to give you that awakening and that curiosity and all of the things that, you know, that help you realize, like I said, it took me a lot longer to get into all of those things because, you just sometimes you just get in survival mode
Oh, for sure.
and you're just on that treadmill, and even though you're surviving, air quotes, uh
Hmm.
you're not thriving in any way. And I also had a very low self-esteem. I didn't feel worthy. I was bitter, I was angry, I was just all of those things, not positive at all. And I think back to it and I'm like, God, what a shitty way to, you know, treat yourself and to be in
Yeah,
life. And now that I have gone through all of those things and dealt with all of that stuff and done the inner work, I can find peace. And I can, with me, it was the horses that helped me, which we talked a lot about on your show as well.
yeah,
So we all have to kind of find that thing that resonates with us, that makes us go, things that make you go, right? Things that make you go, wait a minute, that's not quite right. That is,
yeah,
I can do something about that. And I think that is really key. Um,
absolutely.
what are we missing here? Is there anything that we haven't talked
No,
about? So,
seriously, I'm
I
like,
would, you're like, no, man, I'm exhausted. Uh,
no,
I do want to talk about, so when you were on the oil rig, you came to the idea of starting a podcast. Why a podcast?
so it's kind of funny. Before I had left for the oil rig, a common theme throughout my whole life, because I always would act older than I was. Like I've been told, oh, I thought you were older than you were my whole life, as long as I
Hmm.
can remember. And I loved giving advice. When I was younger, I wanted to be a marriage and family therapist, and then I never ended up pursuing it. I started going into teaching, and so I would always give my friends advice. I would give my older family members advice. I would give anyone advice who wanted it. And I noticed that people felt comfortable talking with me about
Hmm.
that. And so right before I left for the oil rig, I was down bad, going through it, and so are some of my friends. And so they would talk with me about it. And a few of them were like, you should start a podcast. Like, why don't you help people with this? Why don't you talk about it? And I honestly was like, I could never. Like, why would people want to listen to me? Why would people want to hear anything I have to say? Like, what do I know? And then through building my confidence, honestly, in the oil rig and realizing what I was capable of, because I'm like, I would have never thought that I would do that blue collar job like that, but I did it. And so having that confidence start to build, I'm like, well, why not? Like, why couldn't I do it. It's something I love giving people advice. I love talking with people and learning their stories. So I kind of realized not? Why not pursue it? And the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized this actually sounds so fulfilling to me, and it forces me to level up too, and to be to a level where I feel like I can give people advice and tell people my story and like back it, you know what I mean? And be like, look at who I am now versus who I was before. I can back what I'm telling people. And so I guess the oil rig gave me the confidence to pursue it.
Nice, nice. And now you've got over 100 episodes, right?
Yeah.
105, I think, or 106 or whatever. And am I
Yeah.
right? Like over 100K downloads?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's amazing. I mean, that is fantastic. And I too love the podcasting space because I get to meet people like you and I like to hear people's stories. And just, I mean, I feel like humanity suffered so much during the pandemic, and
Hmm.
I feel like we all became very Zoom acquainted because we
Yeah.
couldn't be human acquainted, and I love the fact that I can connect with you. I can connect with someone in Australia. I can connect with and we can share those stories. We can share all of these life experiences that if and I look at it this way, if one person that's out there listening today resonates with your story, whether they're 25 or whether they're 65, and they're like, yeah, I had that same experience and I'm still struggling, or I had a similar, you know what I mean? That if it touches one person and or someone hears it and shares it with somebody else that will also resonate with it, I feel like that's that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
love
why
that you say
I'm,
that.
yeah, thank you. And it sounds
Yeah.
like, you have a similar mantra in terms of why you're doing your podcast. And I think to be a podcast host, to do it, it's a weekly commitment, and
For sure.
it's a lot of heart, it's a lot of hard work. It doesn't seem like it because we're just chatting into a microphone, but there's a lot of stuff, as that
Uh,
goes through in the background. And so yeah, so thank you for doing what you do. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, like you were saying, it is so cool to be able to meet people in the podcasting space because like you were saying, it's people that I would have never met you if I
Yeah,
didn't start this. I would have never been able to meet people from across the world that I've been able to have guests on my podcast if I wouldn't have started it. And I think the coolest thing is when my podcast people started hearing it and like knowing about it, and they would tell me or comment that it meant something to them, that it helped them, I realized I found purpose. My
yeah.
purpose is to help people with my words, and I didn't really realize that until I started doing it, and then people were telling me that I was helping them, and I was like, "Wow, this is why I have the late nights where I'm editing, and this is
Yeah,
why I have the late nights when I'm trying to plan episodes and change my calendar. Like this is why I do it. Because like you were saying, it just seems like, oh, we're just chit-chatting and we
yeah.
hit upload and that's it. But there really is so much that goes on behind it. But I feel like it's so worth it. And I'm sure you can relate so much when you hear your audience tell you how much it means to them that you do what you do.
Absolutely, 100%. And when also, like you said, when you're putting in a late night or you're like, oh my God, the show notes didn't upload or whatever it is. But the thing is, to me, it doesn't feel like work. Like,
Yeah.
I did my thing in corporate America for many, many, many years, and it was
Mhm.
lucrative, it was whatever, but I wasn't in love with it. It didn't light me up. I always had side hustles that gave me what I really needed for inspiration and for passion. And when I do something like this, or coaching, it's like it doesn't feel like work. It
Yeah.
just feels like fun and it feels fulfilling. And the icing on the cake is that, maybe I'm helping someone. Maybe I'm helping someone, live a better life. And that's my wish. So through whatever medium, whether it's podcast or whatever. So
Yeah.
tell me, okay, couple things. And I was going to say, what would you tell your younger self? Well, it already is your younger self. What would you tell, what would you tell someone who had maybe a similar upbringing, that may be still wrestling with some of those things, what would you tell them? What would be
I
your
would,
advice?
yeah, I would say that your past and your childhood traumas do not have to define you. And they hold you back as much as you will let them. You're still victim to the things that happened to you when you were younger if you let them still have a control of you as you get older. That doesn't mean you have to act like nothing ever happened to you, but you can be the good that came from the bad. You can have it build you into someone that's incredible, someone that's helpful, someone that's successful. And so instead of viewing it as, oh, these things happened to me and, I don't know how to overcome it, make the steps, take some affirmations, do some journaling, turn inward and figure out what ways you can help yourself, find people that are your support system. Especially if it's not family, you can find friends, even coworkers, therapists that you can turn to that will be your cheerleader while you're going through this, because I think that's so important too.
Mhm.
And once you feel like you've started to heal from it, you will see how much you were holding yourself back from viewing yourself as the victim of what happened to you. You can have it be your origin story for your success and keep that as your motivating force on working through the traumas that happened to you.
I love it. That's beautiful. And my final question, what's next for
Mhm.
Lexi?
Yeah, I feel like I'm always trying to do something new, but I would
Good, good. I
say,
love that.
yeah, I would say I am in the process of starting to become licensed to be a life coach. So that is really the next steps for me. I want to further Sincerely Self. I feel like I've really found a point where this is what I want to do. And of course, like you were saying, I'm only 23, things change. We have rock bottom moments all the time. I'm sure I'll go through more trials and things like that, but I'm just gonna keep following what feels aligned with me, what brings me joy, what doesn't feel like work, kind of like what you were saying, Sue, and just keep following my inner compass wherever it takes me. And right now it's taken me to be a life coach. And so I'm gonna follow that and yeah, just keep going.
That's amazing. It's funny that you mentioned that because I was going to ask you if that was in the cards for you, and it seems like it is. Well, I think that
Yeah,
that's a beautiful decision,
thank you.
and I wish you much success in that area. And I'll keep tabs on you. Don't worry. We'll be back on the
Yeah,
show.
we'll
Uh,
keep in touch for sure.
Lexi, thank you. This has been a really fun and amazing conversation because, like I said, it kind of, you know, made me think about, my childhood and how I wish that I could have done things differently or come to realizations earlier. But at the same time, it's like, no, I'm where I am now because of the decisions that I made and how I grew over time. And there's no magic pill, first of all, and everyone has their own timeline and everyone has their own journey that they're on.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing your journey. And for those of you listening, if Lexi's journey resonated with you, please listen to her podcast called Sincerely Self. And I will put my episode in the show notes and all of her contact information. Lexi, what's the sincerelyself.com, right? Isn't that
Yeah, just
yeah.
sincerelyselfpodcast.com for the
Okay.
website with the recent episodes, a little bit more about my journey in the oil rig, recent YouTube, all the things. My episode with Sue is on the front page of my website, so you guys can go check it out there as well. But thank you, Sue. I am so honored that I was able to join you and your audience as my first time veering away from just Sincerely Self.
Yeah. Well, thank you for stepping out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, of course. And I
One
love
of
that
many,
you
I'm sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. Hopefully. I love that you were saying that, you know, your timeline, everyone's timeline is different. Because
Mhm.
that's so true. I think the best thing that I can leave your audience members with is your story and own it.
Yeah.
Worrying so much about what happened before is the one thing that you can't change. And it's the one what we have is the present moment. And so
Yeah.
if we're worrying so much about, the things that happened before, all we can do is tell ourselves, I did the best with what I knew, and now I know better, and I'm going to keep doing better and keep doing better and keep doing better.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. One step at a time. And
Yeah.
Lexi, thank you for your wisdom. I appreciate you so much. And like I said, for those of you out there listening, please share this episode with a friend that you think it may resonate with. And come back next week for another fabulous guest on Midlife Strategies for Badass Women.